pray the Lord my soul to take, that we won't lose faith and we won't lose faith. All we got is us, no one can take that away. So don't lose faith, it's gonna be okay. I pray the Lord.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Just Listen to Yourself with Kira Davis. This is a podcast where we take hot topics, hot button issues, and we discuss the talking points on those topics. We draw those talking points all the way out to their logical conclusion. This is a JLTY plus, so it's not just me talking to myself. It's me talking to someone else who's actually doing something in the world instead of just talking. And the format, if you're watching on YouTube, it might look a little different. We had some technical issues, but this information is so important. I was desperate to talk to this woman. I'm so honored to welcome to the show Marley Hornick. She's a co-founder of United Sovereign Americans. That's United for the number 4 freedom.com. And they are a voter integrity group that has launched a project to true the vote across the United States and to restore faith in our election system. Marley, thank you for coming to the show. I'm so glad to have you.
Thanks, Kira. It was a pleasure to meet you. I didn't meet you last week, so it's nice to see you here now.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because I'm going to ask you to give us just the rundown on who you are and what you guys do over there before we dig into it. But I heard about Marley because I went to a community meeting about voter integrity. All of us in California have just about had enough. And so I'm noticing people get out to community meetings. A local group brought Marley in, and I was blown away by the information that she shared. I've known that it's bad. I ran for school board myself here 2 years ago and encountered many shenanigans, but I did not quite realize how bad it was until Marley shared the information that she's learned. And so I think regardless of what state you're in, you're going to want to hear what she has to say. Marley, tell us a little bit about your organization, how it got started, and what you do there.
Yeah, United Sovereign Americans is an all-volunteer organization, and what we do is professional credentialed audits of the official records that states maintain regarding certified federal elections. So the voter roll list is, people often think we're a voter roll cleanup organization. That's not the case. We study the voter rolls and the voter participation histories and the validity of the voters and the validity of the counts from the perspective of criminal law. So we're the first organization in the country to measure the current election misconduct as it is defined in the prosecution guidelines for U.S. attorneys. All of our volunteers who work on our audits specifically are credentialed professionals in the fields of auditing, cybersecurity, information assurance, software development, and other relevant fields to be working on big data sets. And all we do is scan the state official lists for what are called registration records with material errors and omissions. That's the way they're defined in civil rights law at the federal level. And then we scan those records to see how many of them had votes counted. And we've completed these audits in 21 states for the 2022 midterm. And I think we're just about wrapping up something like 15, somewhere between 15 and 20 states for 2024, including, of course, California, which is what brought me all the way up to the other side of the country and meeting Kira and talking about what happened in California in 2024.
As you have been conducting these audits and digging through these roles, I want you to actually, let me start this. Explain a little, this is sort of what blew me away. Explain a little bit more, Marley, about what it means to have a certifiable election. How is an election certified, and why is your organization asserting that perhaps some of these elections were not certifiable under the law? I think a lot of people don't understand. There's a difference between your election being certified and your election being certified under the law.
Right. And I think a lot of people tend to pull their focus towards what was the outcome of the election and making assumptions about whether the outcome of the election was legitimate in their estimation. It's really an opinion issue. And of course, people who like the outcome believe it was fair, and people who dislike the outcome believe it was unfair. That's a problem that will never go away. What makes an election legally valid is real votes, real voters, real counts, and real proof. It's actually pretty simple. And to really understand why it's important to actually root out all the fraud and actually clean up the entire system from registration all the way through to the locked storage, why we have to fix these problems, you have to go back to the United States Constitution. And, the first sentence of the Constitution says, "We, citizens of the United States, establish and ordain this Constitution." And then we list our reasons. And one of them is to secure the blessing of liberty for ourselves and our posterity. And when then the founders said secure the blessing of liberty, they weren't just like being flowery with their language. They meant take liberty and lock it down in America forever. And never again will this country be ruled by self-dealers or con men who are taking the American people for a ride, grabbing up our tax dollars and blowing them on whatever kind of shopping spree that individual is engaged in. Okay. So this is the key. The second sentence now says that all law is going to be established by the US Congress. And the third sentence, before we have a president, before we have courts or anything else, the third sentence says the people choose those lawmakers. And of course, implied is the people can unchoose those lawmakers as well, which is something I think California is having a challenge with, perhaps in regards to the United States Senate at a bare minimum. And I want to say that, when you think about it in that way, when you realize that the entire system of our institutions of government pivots on a legally valid election that reflects the trust and faith in a representative by the American people, by the specific citizens in that election district to govern, to use our resources, the resources of the nation on behalf of the American people within the boundaries of the law, then you realize, oh, we better get this right. We better get this absolutely nailed down. And so then now we're going to talk about how do we get real voters, real votes, real counts, and real proof? And how do we know we don't have them? And it's so simple because all we did was look in the official records of the state of California in regards to this, recent election in 2024, or the state of New York, or Ohio, Missouri, Michigan, Georgia, Florida. We looked in all these states, we looked in their records, and it's obvious that they are not bothering to verify the identity of applicants to vote, voters themselves. They're not verifying that ballots are authentic. I mean, you can't have an election where people just throw a bunch of pieces of paper in and you just, oh, well, here's a piece of paper, let's just count this piece of paper.
California.
Right. Perhaps. And just to be fair, and I appreciate what you're saying, Kira, to be fair, we don't know why this has gotten so broken. We don't know who's responsible because we haven't yet had a criminal investigation to find out where is the rot in the system and who is responsible. Is it absolutely just, arrogance? Do people believe that they are not accountable to the law in the United States of America and not accountable to the citizens? They have a better idea about what's in the best interests of the citizens. They don't have the right to be arrogant like that, right? Like you said, they have to follow the law. Do they not care if it's accurate or not? Do they just want to collect a government paycheck and they don't really care if they did a good job? Well, actually, that's defined election fraud. Even if they just don't care and they don't bother, because again, if it's the third sentence of the Constitution, we can't break it. We can't break the Constitution there and expect for the rest of it to function appropriately.
Some examples. Marley, give us
Yep.
some examples because this really did strike me as well. Now, obviously, I'm a conservative podcaster, so I have a lot of opinions about, as you say, well, when the person we love wins, then we're like, great. And when they don't, then we're like cheating. So I obviously have my opinions. That aside, you're not saying we don't need to be partisan about this. We only need to apply the law. And the law as it stands is not being applied in very basic places. So give us an example of a basic way that the law that you've discovered in certain states, you can take your pick, where the law to count ballots has not been applied properly.
Well, we can stick with California because it's an easy target, honestly. It's one of the worst states in the country, not surprisingly, for the people who live there and the people who criticize California equally, I would say. Let's talk about some of the voters who voted in the 2024 election. And we'll start out slow. We'll ramp ourselves up here. Okay, so there were 205 individuals who have a statewide unique identifier. So they have a voter ID number in California's state registration list, and it has no name, no address, and no other personal information, but they voted. So that's just 205 people. That's 205 illegal ballots, which is 205 counts of felony election fraud. We have 3,125 people who voted who are what we call age discrepant, which is to say they are either too young to vote or they are too old to be alive. So that's 3,125 illegal votes counted by election officials, 3,125 counts of felony election fraud. You cannot count an illegal ballot. If you're an election official, your job is to prevent illegal ballots from diluting the legal ballots of qualified citizen voters. Now, let's see. You have 60,177 votes counted from people registered on January 1st, which is not a valid registration date. It's a false date. The office isn't open on January 1st, and electronic registration is not a factor for these votes, just to be clear. So it has nothing to do with that they sent their registration record on January 1st for all of you edge case people out there who are going, what if? Okay. So it's a false date. That means the real date is unknown, which immediately calls the registration record suspect. And they have to figure out, they have to have a legal process that's called adjudication to resolve the question. It is a legal question, not an opinion, whether these votes can be counted, 60,777. The problem was they didn't have those listed as provisional ballots. As far as we can tell, they just counted them straight. All right, so far we're up to about 64,000 felony election fraud counts.
That's a lot.
Now,
And I want to point out, Marley, before you go on, that there are people in this state who lost their district or their seat by mere hundreds of votes or mere thousands. It matters.
and now we're going to get a little bit more real for California. People who voted before they were registered to vote in your 2024 midterm or 2024 general, 2,440,507.
Wait, in California? In California, I would say that again, Marley. Say it again, because that's going to be a clip. That's going to be a clip. Say it again.
People who had their votes counted in California who voted before they were registered to vote, 2,440,507 in the 2024 election.
That's stunning.
People whose registration records are backdated in the voter rolls, which means if you look at them now, it says they were registered to vote in 28 or something. But if you look at them 2 years ago, it says they were registered to vote in 2020. So how did the voter rolls move forward in time and their registration date move backward in time? And how was it that 2,341,502 of these individual voters had their votes counted equally to yours in the California 2024 election? These votes could have come in provisionally. Now, I'm going to tell you the total number of ballots impacted by these errors and omissions under civil rights law, 5,194. So the question is, did California accept a provisional ballot for 1 out of every 3 voters in 2024 and actually resolve every single one of those legal questions before certifying the election? Or did they illegally certify 52 members in the House of Representatives and Adam Schiff for the US Senate?
I'm sure that the listeners of this podcast are not going to believe those numbers. Marley is talking about millions of illegal votes, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the people who cast the votes were illegal voters or that, but that they were certified or they, under the law, these votes should have been set aside. The way, when you put it like that, Marley, 1 in 3. I'm not sure we're voting for what we're voting for here in California. I'm not asking you to comment on that because that's not what you're doing. You're adjudicating these, but
I do want to comment
stunning.
on
Oh,
it.
please do. Yeah.
This is the problem, Kira. I don't know who won any of the House seats in California in 2024. You don't know who won. And neither does Shirley Weber. She has no idea who legitimately won any of those elections for the state of California. This is 5.5 million legal questions that were tossed aside and simply they just blasted right past it and certified, practically, I think it's about 18% of the, maybe 12%. I think I did calculate it one time, and it's like 12% of the United States House of Representatives. 12% of those seats for the country.
That is stunning. Please continue. I
It's
know. What do you
stunning.
say? What are you supposed to say? I mean, it's absolutely stunning. I want to tell you something, Marley, that struck me while you were speaking. I almost feel embarrassed to say this because I know a lot of people were way ahead of me on this. But in the interest of full disclosure, I'll be on, and I'm a communicator. So when you were talking about the law, which I have never, ashamed to say, I've never really dug into election law or how it's, but I imagine most Americans haven't, but it's right there in the Constitution. When you read it, it's very clear and how elections should be certified. So you're talking about multiple states sending in basically uncertifiable election results that impact a presidential election. In 2020, when President Trump was asking Mike Pence to reject the certification of the vote, I felt very uncomfortable with that. I thought, what is he expecting Pence to do? Pence is doing his constitutional duty, and what can he do? He's got to go up there and do the thing. Listening to you, what I realized, what President Trump was telling him, was this election is not certifiable. We are getting results from states who have not properly certified their election. We must return and adjudicate all those ballots. And that's what I realize has been happening, Marley, I think at the federal level, but at the state level, is that there are politicians, some, and activists who are going, these aren't certifiable results. We're not asking you to change the election. We're asking you to go back and certify everything according to the law. It blew my mind. I don't think I've been looking at this the right way.
Right. Well, that's going around, to be honest, because the way that the law addresses these problems, it doesn't say whether or not an outcome is correct. Elections are a process. They're not an endpoint. They're a process. And if you break the process, you contort the endpoint. You can no longer have clarity. I don't know if, I can't speak for President Trump in 2020 regarding what his ideas or beliefs were, but I can speak to the duty of the vice president in that circumstance. And again, I'm not talking about Mike Pence. I'm talking about our institutions of government. So our institutions of government were very, very rigorously vetted and gamed out and designed to totally gap against tyranny. The founders did not want us to live under tyrants. They had experienced that. They wanted to end it forever. So when we look at our institutions of government, like the role of the vice president, I don't care who's standing in that position. They have a clear duty. Their constitutional duty is to be loyal to the citizens of the United States of America who ratified the United States Constitution through their representatives in 1789. That is who the sovereign of this country is. So Mike Pence, if he is not 100% certain, if there is any legal question about the validity of election returns regarding the Electoral College from anywhere in the country, his job is to say, hold on, America. We're going to have to go and run a little investigation over here in Pennsylvania. We're going to have to do a little deep dive over here in Arizona or wherever they're having these challenges because they're not allowed. You see, election officials, the vice president in that instance, who's operating as a de facto election official, they are not umpires for our country. They do not have the right to decide whether it was a ball or a strike, no matter how many cameras they set up around home plate. Their only job is to make sure that every vote that's counted comes from a qualified American citizen voter, is on a legitimate ballot, is fairly counted, and ends up in locked storage so that the entire process can be audited again if required, if there's any question about the results. Because if we don't have legitimate representative government, then we don't have America. That's what I'm saying. If this is the third sentence of the Constitution and we're breaking the Constitution there, how are people thinking that the rights all the way down in the Bill of Rights, which weren't even ratified for several more years, how are they expecting those to be protected? How are they expecting the guarantee of a Republican form of government to be protected when it's broken at the third? It just doesn't make any sense. And I agree. You know, I didn't know about a lot of these things. I had to educate myself, and I had to do it because I love my family. I love creation. I am so grateful for my life and the opportunity to walk on this earth and see all of the beautiful things that my eyes are able to see. And I said to myself, you know what? We better fix this. We better get this all the way down to the mat because they're going to come and take our country. And that's what we see. You know, we're talking about California. They're doing this in Texas. They're doing it in Ohio. They're doing it in the places where we arrogantly may believe as conservative Americans that we can't be defeated. But you look into the specific details of the records and you have these materiality issues. The USA also did a comprehensive study about the verification of voters. We said, okay, if they're not going to try to verify the voters, let's see if we can. And through our attorneys, we hired a private investigative firm. The private investigator checked voter registrations on a prevalence basis, perfectly randomized on a prevalence basis in 3 different commercially available law enforcement databases that are used to find people precisely in space and time. And you won't believe it. You know, in California in 2022, 1,000 votes were counted from fictitious registrants. They don't exist. You cannot find them in any of those 3 databases.
Wow.
So we said, well, we're not just going to look in one. We're going to make sure we're right. We couldn't find them in 3. We couldn't find 447,000 people in the state of Pennsylvania whose votes were counted. They're fake. How on earth can that much fraud be taking place right under our noses and nobody understands? And this goes to the solution. And you were saying, like, I think we've been thinking about this incorrectly, which is true. This is not material, you know, this is not clerical error. This is criminal election fraud. Whether the election officials are doing it on purpose or not, they are failing to ensure that the American government serves the American people. They are the ones breaking the United States Constitution when they act like it doesn't really matter either way. And this is a criminal act. And in the past, in multiple instances in our history, going back to 1888, 1941, 1973, and many other times, election officials have gone to federal prison. This is upheld. Those 3 decisions are Supreme Court decisions that upheld sending election officials to federal prison for what is called certifying a false tally in a single polling site. And we are talking about, in the state of California, certifying a false tally with 5.5 million open legal questions glossed over by arrogant officials or perhaps malicious officials who decided on behalf of the citizens of the state of California who was qualified to serve in Congress. It's criminal.
It's criminal, Marley. And when I think about what we've been through here in California over since the beginning of the year and what these elected officials have done or not done to our population, it's infuriating as well. And the least our officials should be able to do is assure us that when we vote, our vote is counting, that when we vote, our vote is secure. And that is a constitutional mandate. And it is stunning to me that we have gotten to this point in this country where we have so normalized just flouting the Constitution. People don't ask these questions. And when you do ask these questions, you're labeled as a right-wing nut job. I want to read to you 1 second here, Marley. I looked up what other people were saying about you. And I found this article from a website called Democracy Docket. And it's talking about your group.
That's Mark Elias's website.
Is it? This is by Matt Cohen. They did a very lovely profile on you. It's titled How United Sovereign Americans is Radicalizing an Anti-Voting Movement. They call you right-wing activists. They say that your goal is to suppress voting. What's your response to articles like that?
It's just a lie. I mean, see you in court. And I don't mean regarding defamation. I mean regarding election validity. Interestingly, I have a piece that I wrote recently. It's up on Daily Caller. Maybe I'll give you a link.
Link to that in the show notes. Yeah.
We did a comparison study between our verification of voters study that we did and a Brennan Center verification of voters study that they did, where they weren't verifying voters. They were talking about, basically, if we require proof of citizenship in order to vote, we're going to be disenfranchising millions of qualified American voters. And they went on to say, for example, they found 21 million people who don't have their citizenship documents readily available. This is not a legal standard. Brennan Center just invented this idea that if your documents aren't readily available, that's a crime. It's disenfranchisement, right? And so then they say, well, the reason that a lot of these voters are disenfranchised on the basis of not having their documents readily available is because they took the time and trouble to put their citizenship papers into safety deposit boxes at banks. Another reason why voters are going to be disenfranchised is because they lost or damaged their citizenship documents. So basically, either people are too competent or couldn't care less in order to prove their citizenship. But regardless, you know what? Guess what? If you want to enter the United States, like let's say you go on a vacation, right? You decide, oh, I want to go to whatever, I don't know, Poland or something. You want to go to the Greece, wherever you're going to go, and you want to come back into the United States of America. Guess what you have to show? Proof of citizenship to enter the country. You don't show them an electric bill. It doesn't count.
Right.
So it's just a fake argument. They're creating all of this terror and fear and shame and humiliation on this DEI basis, but it's not real. And meanwhile, yeah, they're calling me names and they're calling Harry names and calling, the thousands and thousands of people in United Sovereign Americans who are volunteering. We study the law together because, of course, like none of us had read this stuff. We study it together on Thursday nights. We have it's open to anyone in the world. You can come and attend our study session where we open up either some election law, we open up Supreme Court precedent, we read the Constitution together. We study these principles so that when we go, like yesterday, we had teams in, I think, something like 20 states go all at once on one day and meet with their state legislators and ask their state legislators to demand that their attorney generals open up investigations into these issues. And we also asked the state legislators to consider passing our legislative proposal, which provides for audits that start at the beginning of the election process. So you don't like run the whole election, then audit it and see if it was okay, and then certify it. You actually audit the entire time because you're always monitoring for some kind of threat escalation, basically. Again, come back down to ground, right? This election that the state is going to administer is going to secure a multi-trillion-dollar budget for the world's leading power, the biggest nation in the world, and it's going to also secure individual sovereignty for American citizens who love freedom in perpetuity. And you don't just hope you get it right. You don't just guess with something like that. Let's say, well, if they're registered on January 1st, it's probably just somebody pressed enter by accident. It's like, you don't do that. You have to know. And that gets back to your original question. What does certify mean? Well, the root of certify is certain. It's not there's no questions. And so literally when that chief election official at the state level, which there's only 50 in the whole country, when they sign that certification document, they are simultaneously saying the state government and the federal government are legitimately representing the citizens of the state and the citizens of the United States at the same time. And they better be certain, because if not, it's perjury. And it's not just an official misconduct, it's a personal misconduct. And that individual can be prosecuted, and they can also be sued in civil court under civil rights for deprivation of rights acting under color of law. Both of those are our two pathways, basically. We need the legislation to make sure that the system is totally secure throughout the entire process, to monitor for threats by continually auditing during the process. We need prosecution. If we have investigations at the criminal level, we need Attorney General Bondi to open up serious investigations of the work that United Sovereign Americans has completed. And if it's warranted, to prosecute people and put them in jail. And then we need to file civil rights lawsuits against officials who have clearly deprived the American people of the right to choose our representatives, the only right that is in the original Constitution, which, just as an aside, because I always think about the asides, that's the only right the founders could agree on. That's why it's the only one in the original Constitution as ratified in 1789. It's the only one they thought needed to be crystal clear.
Marley, we're running out of time. So I want to thank you for coming on and explaining some of this. I know there's a lot more, and maybe we can have you back on in the future. I know I'm definitely going to sign up for the study sessions. There's so much I want to learn. You can find more of this work at unitedforfreedom.com. That's the number 4. But before I let you go, Marley, leave us with one last thought, what you want to leave, for the Americans listening and where they can find out more.
I just want to correct. It's Unite for Freedom.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Unite for Freedom. I'll make sure that's right on all of our stuff.
Okay. Thank you. You can also find us on X at United S American, or me personally at Marley Hornick. And we do need your help. If you can help, if you want to volunteer and participate in things like our advocacy day or our resolution readings or our letter writing campaigns, we need your help with all of those things. If you have marketing skills or other kinds of particular skills, data analytics skills, we can use your help in those areas. And also, if you can't volunteer, a lot of these studies are very expensive, to tell you the truth. We all volunteer, no one takes a paycheck. But our prevalence study, for example, because we had to hire professionals, and it's good that we did that, we created evidence-ready, court-ready documents about fictitious voters voting at a wild portion. But that study took us about $150,000 to fund. So your donations are not only appreciated, but they are necessary. If you want United Sovereign Americans to keep doing this work, we filed 9 federal lawsuits in 2024. We have more coming. If you want the people who have really barreled down on this, just like gone right down in and figured this whole thing out at the root. If you want us to keep working, please contribute generously. We need our John Hancocks here to save our country once again in 2026. And the last thing I just want to say is I love what President Trump's idea is about having a constitutional amendment that has, one-day voting, paper ballots, in-precinct voting. I love that idea. And if we want to see that come to reality, we have to fix 2024. We have to secure, the 2026 election before it happens, so we can get our massive mandate in Congress and pass a constitutional amendment to fix this forever. Wouldn't that be great? And then people who love this country could go back to enjoying it. And we could have this problem resolved once and for all. That would be a beautiful thing. So just take that in mind. Yes, President Trump is correct, but we can't get there without a mandate in Congress, which we voted for, we believe. We believe there was a tremendous amount of down ballot fraud based on what the American people say all over the place. But if not, let's find out in 2026. Let's make a fair, accurate, honest, legally valid election. And let's find out if we can pass that constitutional amendment by securing the election in advance. Thank you so much, Kira, for having me on.
Thank you, Marley. All right, we're going to let you go. Don't forget to like, subscribe, share, all that good stuff. Follow me on Twitter at Real Kira Davis. And until we meet again, remember, every once in a while, just stop and listen to yourself.
I pray the Lord my soul to take, that we won't lose faith and we won't lose faith. All we got is us, no one can take that away. So don't lose faith, it's gonna be okay. I pray the Lord my soul to take, that we won't lose faith and we won't lose faith. All we got is us, no one can take that away. So don't lose